Breaking Ellen DeGeneres arrest warrant, issued after shocking audio at Diddy trial. 1 hour ago, in a move that stunned both courtroom observers and the wider entertainment world, Judge Harrison Trent of the California Superior Court issued a federal arrest warrant for Ellen DeGeneres. The decision followed the unsealing and live playback of a previously unknown audio recording, allegedly left behind by the late Stephen Twitch Boss. The courtroom, already on edge due to the high-profile trial of entertainment mogul Sean Diddy Combs, descended into chaos as the recording played, revealing allegations that shifted the case's entire trajectory. The tape, described as emotionally raw and deeply disturbing, appears to be a voice memo recorded by Twitch just weeks before his death in December 2022, a death that until now had been officially ruled a suicide. In it, he denies that narrative. "This isn't random," the recording began. His voice was steady yet heavy with implication. "If they say I took my life, I didn't. I saw too much. I know too much." Listeners in the courtroom reported chills as Twitch described events and individuals tied to a hidden darker side of the entertainment industry. He referenced covert parties held in hotels under false LLCs, suggesting they were fronts for activities involving manipulation, coercion, and worse. Most chillingly, he named E and S individuals described as influential insiders who reassured him while keeping him trapped. One of them, according to his words, was Ellen DeGeneres. The recording painted a picture of paranoia and betrayal. "I went with Ellen. She told me to smile. Said everyone in the room was family. But I didn't feel safe. I felt watched." The courtroom gasped when he added, "If something happens to me, don't just look at Diddy." What followed was an instant escalation. Legal teams scrambled. Media were ushered out, only to be allowed back in after order was restored. Judge Trent, known for his measured demeanor, signed the arrest warrant without delay. As speculation mounted, federal investigators confirmed that they had already been building a case, linking Ellen to several undisclosed gatherings between 2019 and 2021 gatherings, where phones were banned, security was outsourced, and guest lists were shrouded in secrecy. Surveillance footage from one such event, now in the possession of federal prosecutors, reportedly shows Ellen and Twitch arriving together. He appears tense, she appears calm. Within hours of the initial audio playback, prosecutors unveiled a second, more alarming voice memo, labeled simply "Final Draft." Analysts confirmed that the file was created 3 days before Twitch's death. This time his tone was not just revealing, it was final. "I tried to believe you," he said. "You told me people who disappear wanted to. But I know better now." The courtroom stilled. Unlike the first message, this wasn't a warning, it was a farewell. In the background of the recording, faint city noise could be heard, giving it a harrowingly real ambiance. He referenced specific dates, locations, even flight numbers, 2 of which aligned perfectly with Diddy-hosted events. Ellen, once seen only as a bystander, was now confirmed to have been physically present at both. Investigators traced her private jet to Los Angeles on the same weekends, December 11, 2021, and April 9, 2022, where luxury suites booked under shell companies placed her directly adjacent to Diddy's so-called after-hours floors. Guest lists, once sealed, were subpoenaed. One name stood out: Stephen Boss, listed under entertainment confirmed. When questioned, hotel staff at the Highland Viceroy described a quiet man who looked over his shoulder more than he looked at people. Surveillance footage, enhanced and reviewed frame by frame, showed a brief elevator interaction. Ellen touched Twitch's arm. He recoiled. No sound, but the tension was obvious. That elevator ride would be the last time the two were seen together in public. And then came the revelation that broke through the court's stunned silence: a financial transfer. Twitch's widow, Allison Holker, had reportedly received $3.2 million labeled as a legacy disbursement from an undisclosed entertainment entity within 2 weeks of his passing. When questioned, her legal team insisted it was for estate management and residual earnings, but legal experts were quick to push back. That's not a residual payment, one attorney stated. That's hush money, structured and deliberate. Public perception shifted overnight. Allison, once seen as a grieving wife, now faced subpoenas for all correspondence between November 2022 and March 2023. But she wasn't the only one feeling pressure. Former staffers of The Ellen Show, speaking anonymously, began to echo each other. Don't ask about Diddy, avoid discussing after-parties, stay silent about Ellen's inner circle. One producer recalled, "We weren't supposed to even look curious. Twitch tried to talk once, and he was pulled off air for energy issues. But I saw his eyes. Something broke inside him." The court soon confirmed there was a third audio file ominously titled, "If They Say I Gave Up." Its metadata showed it had been recorded just 12 hours before Twitch's death. The contents remained classified, but 2 lines were leaked by an insider. "I loved my family. I loved dancing. But they're going to say I gave up. That's what hurts most." Prosecutors announced plans to introduce the third file only after authentication was finalized. In the meantime, social media erupted. Hashtags like "Justice for Twitch" and "She Knew" trended worldwide. Ellen's silence, once a symbol of grace, now screamed guilt. And then came the final pivot. In a special closed-door hearing, a private confession video recorded by Ellen months earlier was introduced into evidence. Saved on an encrypted drive only unlocked through a forensic digital trace, the file was titled, "If They Ask." In it, she sat alone, eyes tired, posture slouched. "I told him he'd be fine. I told him to stop asking questions, because I was scared too. I didn't kill him. But I made sure no one helped him either." That confession wasn't a bombshell. It was the building crumbling. Back outside the courtroom, Warner Brothers' lot was quiet. No tapings, no crowds, no crew. Ellen's Empire daytime TV books, production contracts was in free fall. Streaming services began pulling reruns. PR firms severed ties. Foundations bearing her name went dark. In a stunning move, Ellen's legal team entered negotiations. The terms reduced sentencing in exchange for full cooperation. She handed over guest rosters, flight manifests, financial records, and encrypted emails that detailed years of selective recruitment. Prosecutors discovered code words like light shift, a term for late-night parties, face pass, a guest brought by a VIP, and whisper list invitees, with known hesitation or resistance. Twitch's name appeared dozens of times. In response, Allison finally broke her silence. Standing on courthouse steps, she said only this: he wasn't depressed. He was disillusioned. His only mistake was trusting people who mistook his kindness for consent. A memorial was planned for what would have been Twitch's 42nd birthday. Thousands were expected to attend. The judge in open court said, "This case is no longer about one celebrity or one show. It's about a culture that knew and chose not to see." But what was coming next would reach further than anyone imagined. By the third day of proceedings, the trial had evolved beyond a courtroom drama. It had become a cultural reckoning. What had started as a case centered on Sean Diddy Combs was now unraveling a system. Ellen's cooperation turned the spotlight toward people and institutions long considered untouchable. The so-called midnight floors, once a whispered euphemism for secretive after-hours industry gatherings, were now formally recognized in legal documents as the epicenter of a sprawling network of coercion, manipulation, and silent complicity. Emails uncovered from Twitch's cloud archive told a chilling tale. In a hidden folder titled "Archived Contracts and Quiet Prosecutors," found scans of NDAs bearing timestamp signatures and internal PR memos. One thread stood out: a burner email to a known Hollywood crisis firm. "If he leaks, pivot to mental health. We've used it before." The court exploded in reaction. A coalition of whistleblowers formed almost overnight. Former assistants, freelance crew members, junior dancers, and hospitality staff all spoke many for the first time. One technician described being paid in cash, forbidden to ask for names. Another remembered Ellen giving instructions with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Testimonies described elaborate efforts to silence anyone who asked too many questions, non-disclosure agreements presented under pressure, sudden firings, whispered warnings, be careful what you repeat. The portrait that emerged wasn't one of a few bad actors, but of a whole architecture designed to maintain silence. And the deeper the prosecutors dug, the more unsettling the connections became. An anonymous letter postmarked from Nevada and written in careful looping cursive arrived at the courthouse. It described a near-identical experience from 2017, a penthouse, a locked elevator. Ellen arriving late and giving instructions. I thought I was alone, the letter ended, but now I know I'm not. Now I know. Forensic analysts verified handwriting patterns. Cross-checks with internal hotel logs from that weekend, obtained through a reluctant court order, placed Ellen Diddy and 3 guests from her production team at the same location. Meanwhile, the FBI confirmed a pattern of money movement tied to shell companies, often labeled as event equity support or wellness campaign disbursement. Financial experts hired by the state testified these weren't promotions, they were payoffs. Backlash reached a crescendo. Streaming networks suspended over a dozen daytime and celebrity-led productions pending internal reviews. The Ellen Show's production company was subpoenaed for every guest list and after-party sponsor from 2015 to 2022. Suddenly, the industry wasn't defending Ellen. It was distancing itself. And through all of this, the public responded not with outrage alone, but with grief. Mourning for a man they had once only known as a dancer. Twitch had smiled for millions, but behind it he had been silenced. Now, finally, the world was hearing him. The Artist Integrity Review Board, a newly formed commission of former performers, legal experts, and trauma specialists, launched a secure platform for survivors to report abuse and coercion anonymously. Within 1 week, the server reported over 800 verified entries. Among the submissions were transcripts, voicemails, and journal excerpts. One recounting was particularly haunting. She told me if I wanted to dance again, I'd have to be quiet about what I saw. That people like me don't get a second chance. Though the sender's identity was redacted, investigators later confirmed a match with a young choreographer who'd vanished from the circuit in 2020. That individual resurfaced days later and testified under seal. Ellen's silence, once weaponized by her legal team, had become a liability. After the leak of her private confession video, the media frenzy reached a new high. In it, she stated, I told him to smile. I told him they'd protect him, but I lied. Because I was scared too, because I wanted to be invited back. The video spread like wildfire. Commentary segments, think pieces, and reaction videos flooded platforms. Hashtags like Watch She Knew, Watch Midnight Floors, and No More Silence trended globally. For many, it was no longer about one individual. It was about an industry that had normalized silence as safety. Under mounting pressure, the California State Attorney's Office launched a formal inquiry into the entertainment industry's use of coercive NDAs. The review focused heavily on agreements signed by staff talent and contractors connected to daytime talk shows and post-award parties. The Ellen DeGeneres show, once celebrated for its kindness campaigns and feel-good segments, was now ground zero for the investigation. Amidst the chaos, Allison Holker, Twitch's widow, filed a formal motion for a posthumous inquest into whether her husband had been coerced, drugged, or threatened in the days leading up to his death. The motion was supported by independent forensic experts and civil rights attorneys. This isn't about revenge, Allison said in a press statement. This is about the truth. Because he didn't fall apart, he was broken down. Then came the security footage. Recovered from the Highland Viceroy's upper level, the grainy black and white video showed Twitch and Ellen in an elevator. The body language was undeniable. Twitch appeared tense, shifting his weight, glancing at the corners of the ceiling. Ellen's movements were calm, rehearsed. She reached out. He flinched. She spoke. He turned. The footage had no audio but forensic lip readers, brought in by the prosecution, interpreted one line from Twitch, "I don't want this." That phrase became a rallying cry. Murals were painted. Dance groups posted tribute routines with captions quoting his words. Ellen's compound remained under heavy surveillance with no public sightings for weeks. But the legal world didn't wait. Prosecutors moved to play the third audio recording if they say I gave up. Ellen's legal team fought to suppress it, citing privacy and hearsay laws. The motion was denied. The file recovered from a password-protected drive, decrypted using federal forensic methods, was played in closed session. Witnesses described the room as silent like a funeral. 2 lines were later quoted in the official transcript. They will say, "I gave up. But I never did. I just got tired of dancing for people who didn't care if I drowned." Judge Trent, known for rarely showing emotion, reportedly wiped his eyes. By the time the public session resumed, the court had taken on the gravity of a truth commission. It was no longer about a single death or a single trial. It was about decades of silence and systemic manipulation. That evening, Allison stood in front of a crowd at a candlelight vigil held in downtown Los Angeles. Thousands gathered. No sponsors, no brands, just people, fans, dancers, survivors. She spoke softly. "He danced so you could smile. You looked away when he cried, but now you can hear him. Don't forget him." As she stepped away from the mic, a young dancer, barely in his teens, stepped forward and started a solo routine. No music, just movement. By the end, hundreds joined, and in that moment it was no longer about headlines or trials. It was about him. The days following the public release of Ellen's video confession became a masterclass in systemic unraveling. Industry executives, publicists, and studio heads found themselves swept into an inquiry that was no longer localized, it was federal. The Department of Justice opened a parallel investigation, citing potential violations of labor trafficking and financial fraud laws. Suddenly, former industry parties were being legally reclassified as unauthorized and unregulated gatherings that exposed vulnerable employees to coercive environments. The phrase "culture of complicity" became a legal term of art. As Ellen's cooperation expanded, so did the scope of her disclosures. In a closed-door session with federal prosecutors, she provided a list of code-named guests, many of whom had operated under pseudonyms or burner profiles. A surprising name reemerged: Allison Holker. Though previously cast in the role of a grieving widow, records showed she had received 2 additional disbursements in 2021 and early 2022, each labeled under a shell foundation tied to a now-defunct mental health awareness nonprofit. Pressed by prosecutors, Allison returned to court not under subpoena, but voluntarily. Her voice wavered as she admitted she had signed documents I didn't understand and received support packages after a studio-affiliated therapist had reached out. "I was trying to keep my family together," she said. "But I was never told the full truth." The courtroom did not condemn her. If anything, her appearance triggered a wave of empathy. She, too, had been a piece in the machinery. Meanwhile, new whistleblowers surfaced almost daily. One, a junior booking agent for a streaming network, described internal memos that instructed publicists to stonewall Twitch-related narratives and reroute sympathy content to general wellness stories. Others detailed systemic deletion of security footage, tampering with access logs, and pressure to drop investigations. The full weight of the cover-up was becoming clear. This was not the secret of a few bad people, it was the silence of many good ones. The media began dubbing the widening scandal the Smile Industry Collapse. Its namesake came from an internal training manual, used at multiple talk show studios, which taught junior producers to prioritize harmony over truth. That phrase, intended as PR strategy, now echoed like a confession. A turning point came when Ellen's longtime producer, who had resigned 2 years prior under vague wellness grounds, returned with hard evidence. On a thumb drive labeled "Backdoor" were encrypted files showing internal risk assessments, documents analyzing which staff were most likely to go rogue and leak private event details. Twitch had been marked medium-high risk after an offhand remark caught on a hot mic during a segment rehearsal. Sometimes the smile feels like a prison. Producers flagged the comment. He was later scheduled for a forced mental health sabbatical. This revelation hit hard. During the next court session, an ex-staff psychologist testified that several stars had retained private in-house therapists, not for treatment, but for surveillance. "We were paid to assess employees emotionally," she said, "but our reports went straight to management. The goal wasn't healing, it was control." Within days, subpoenas were issued to therapy clinics linked to over a dozen celebrities. One clinic, licensed as a wellness branding consultancy, had no licensed therapists on staff, but had collected $1.7 million over 4 years. Among its contracts, a behavioral monitoring agreement with Ellen's studio. The curtain had fallen. What lay behind it was not only betrayal, it was architecture. The cultural shockwaves were no longer limited to Hollywood. High schools began canceling dance programs named after celebrity patrons. Universities pulled honorary degrees. A well-known children's hospital severed ties with its longtime celebrity ambassador, citing moral inconsistencies. Even tourism boards began scrubbing promotional campaigns linked to now indicted personalities. But while corporate faces faded, grassroots efforts surged. The Artist Integrity Review Board's platform, initially launched as a trauma registry, evolved into a verified storytelling archive. Survivors submitted entries not just to expose, but to testify. One entry read, she said, "Just smile for the donors. I was 19. I had 2 jobs. I smiled. I also cried in the bathroom for 40 minutes. Submissions flooded in, from choreographers in Atlanta, from stylists in London, from makeup artists in Toronto, from stagehands in Sydney. A pattern became clear: the abuse of image, the commodification of charm, and the branding of silence as professionalism. Back in court, Ellen formally pled guilty to 2 counts, obstruction of justice and conspiracy to suppress evidence. But the sentencing did not follow a traditional model. At the insistence of the prosecution and with the agreement of the victims' committee, she was enrolled in a pilot justice program. It combined financial reparations with mandatory testimony and active cooperation in unraveling the deeper systemic architecture. She would spend 2 years in a restricted residence sentence, a hybrid between house arrest and monitored public accountability. She would also record an educational series for survivors and industry newcomers, revealing in full the tactics used to manipulate consent. Ellen's face appeared in one final broadcast. No production team, no editing, no audience. "I let the silence work for me," she said. "Now I'm going to use it for something else." Still, the public remained skeptical. It wasn't about a show anymore. It was about generations of dancers, creatives, and assistants who had been trained to think that silence was a skill. On what would have been Twitch's 42nd birthday, his family hosted a memorial unlike any other. Thousands gathered downtown. Instead of speeches, there were dances, choreographed freestyle improvised. Each performer wore a single word on their chest, words like ignored, controlled, dismissed, heard. Allison took the mic only once. He wasn't a storyline, he wasn't a casualty, he was the warning. That night, billboards across Los Angeles changed their usual ads. They lit up with a single line in white on black: "He didn't give up. He gave everything." The moment was no longer private grief, it was public reflection. And just as the city lit up with truth, so did the next courtroom, the one where Diddy's sealed testimony was finally unsealed. What he said would take this from cultural crisis to historical reckoning. When the court convened for the unsealing of Sean Diddy Combs' sealed proffer, the atmosphere was nothing short of volatile. Spectators, journalists, and survivors alike knew this wasn't going to be just another plea deal. What they didn't anticipate was how deeply it would cut through the fabric of the entertainment world. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as prosecutors began reading aloud from the proffer a document that detailed Diddy's formal cooperation in exchange for partial immunity on specific federal charges. Unlike past statements where blame was deflected or minimized, this one was unfiltered, brutal, calculated. He didn't just name names, he named systems. According to the document, the now infamous midnight floors were not spontaneous gatherings. They were coordinated recruitment pipelines for exploitation masked as industry networking. Hosted in luxury penthouses, branded wellness retreats, or secret residencies during award season, these events were designed to blur professional boundaries and emotional defenses, as Diddy described it. What followed was a list. Dozens of high-profile names, agents, publicists, executives, and celebrities. But what shocked the courtroom most was the internal classification system. He revealed a 3-tier roster used to manage who could be approached, invited, or pressured. Twitch, he said plainly, was Tier 1. That meant trusted by the host, emotionally compliant, likely to remain loyal if given status. Diddy's words were clinical. He was never meant to speak, he was meant to shine, but not to see. He went further, explaining how Ellen's role wasn't just passive. She wasn't merely a guest at these gatherings. She was an active recruiter. She didn't find victims. She found believers. That's harder to detect. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even hardened legal professionals flinched. The proffer detailed how Ellen would recommend individuals from her circle, especially those in financial or emotional transition. Dancers on contract lapses, assistants post-divorce, producers in burnout. She could smell instability and frame it as opportunity, Diddy said. But the cruelty wasn't in the invitation. It was in the aftermath. Many of the guests, particularly those in the entertainment lower rungs, left these events traumatized but voiceless. One entry in the proffer quoted an anonymous writer who attended 2 such nights. "You don't realize it's not a party until you try to leave." The court confirmed that one of Ellen's shell companies, registered under a Belizean tax shelter, was used to fund transportation, cover last-minute hotel shifts, and handle NDA processing. Investigators traced over $8.4 million in unexplained logistics reimbursements. One flight manifest included 3 names that now carried weight: Ellen, Twitch, and a high-level music executive who abruptly resigned last month. Their destination, an unlisted private villa off the Florida coast, known internally as the Lighthouse. The Lighthouse, prosecutors revealed, was less a destination and more an erasure point. Devices were locked in lead-lined boxes. Staff was nonverbal. Entry required biometric verification, and there was only one rule: no questions. The crowd outside the courtroom swelled as reporters broke the story. Protesters held signs with Twitch's face on them. One read, "You didn't silence him, you recorded him." In the days that followed, Diddy's testimony lit a wildfire in every major entertainment guild and union. Emergency sessions were held, contracts were revised, entire boards were dissolved overnight, and former staff, once silenced by fear, now had immunity and purpose. Back in court, the prosecution submitted 432 pages of internal communications between Ellen and her inner circle. The content ranged from scheduling guest appearances to preparing individuals for exclusive retreats. One message stood out: he's asking too many questions. Schedule a break. Remind him he's part of the family. That message, dated 2 months before Twitch's death, was sent to an assistant producer. Attached to it was a flyer for a retreat labeled Stillness Weekend, the same event where Twitch was last seen in public before his mood allegedly shifted. But the turning point came when a long-buried voicemail surfaced. Stored in a forgotten cache on an old work phone, the message was from Twitch to an unknown number. His voice was calm, tired, determined. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't say it in person. I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't unstable. I was scared. I asked for help. I got advice, but I never got protection." The courtroom was silent. Twitch's mother, present every day of the proceedings, wept quietly. Ellen, now mandated to appear in person, sat motionless, her lawyer whispering nothing that could make this disappear. Her empire had already crumbled. Now all that remained was accountability. That evening, her home was no longer guarded by PR but by state marshals. Her assets, personal and corporate, were frozen pending restitution hearings, and her name was formally removed from her charitable foundation by unanimous board vote. But this wasn't just about Ellen anymore. Diddy's continued cooperation revealed the index, a private encrypted list kept by a now defunct PR agency. The index logged risk factors, loyalty scores, psychological notes, and potential exit costs for every individual ever involved in the midnight floors. Twitch's name was marked with a red star, potential catalyst if turned. A judge ordered the entire index admitted into public record. Within 48 hours, 12 subpoenas were issued. By the end of the week, 3 arrests had been made, and a Senate subcommittee opened a hearing into the entertainment industry's use of NDAs, talent contracts, and informal power networks to structure emotional compliance. The industry had no defense, just silence. Across Hollywood, the ripple effect became a wave. Studios began quietly rewriting production policies. Influencers disavowed collaborations. Syndication rights were pulled. Entire seasons were scrubbed from catalogs. But something else emerged. Former staffers, once scared, ashamed, or discredited, began gathering. They didn't call themselves victims. They called themselves witnesses. In online forums, they told stories not of survival, but of realization. One wrote, "He wasn't the only one who felt watched. He was just the only one who said it out loud." The phrase caught fire. It became the tagline of the next wave of protest movements and legislation. Outside the courthouse, on the final day of that week's hearings, a mural was unveiled. It showed Twitch mid-motion dancing, yes, but no longer alone. Behind him were faint silhouettes of others once unseen, and written in bold across the bottom, he danced. We watched. Now we speak. What began as a single arrest warrant had now grown into a full-scale cultural reckoning. But one chapter remained: the sentencing, and whether Ellen would use her final statement to protect, to deflect, or to finally truly confess. The sentencing chamber was silent. Ellen DeGeneres stood alone. No lawyers spoke on her behalf. No witnesses came forward in her defense. She faced the judge, a nation watching, and the memory of a man whose voice had become louder in death than it ever was in life. Judge Harrison Trent looked at her for a long moment before offering her the opportunity to speak. She stepped forward. "I stopped listening when I should have started," she began. Her voice didn't tremble. "I smiled when I should have asked questions. I stayed silent because I could. And now I'll carry that forever. No excuses, no tears, just the truth spoken too late." The court sentenced her to 2 years in a restricted accountability program requiring restitution, public testimony, and compulsory participation in ongoing investigations. Some called it lenient. Others called it necessary. But for those closest to Stephen Twitch Boss, it was something else entirely: a beginning. On what would have been his 42nd birthday, thousands gathered in downtown Los Angeles for a public memorial. Dancers performed in his honor. Silence fell between movements, intentional, sacred. It was no longer mourning, it was witnessing. Allison Holker stood before the crowd. He wasn't a headline, she said. He wasn't a hashtag. He was a father, a creator, a friend. And today we dance not because he's gone, but because he finally told his story and the world listened. From the crowd, a voice shouted, "He didn't give up." And the chant echoed again and again. He didn't give up. In that moment, everything changed, forever.